Well, it's 11 o'clock now. I guess we can go ahead and get started. Thanks to everyone for joining us this morning for protecting confidential business information, servers, and networks while working remotely during COVID-19. My name is Christy Simon. I'm the CEO of the Central Maryland Chamber of Commerce, and I'm glad to be here this morning with our amazing panel, who I'll be introducing shortly. But quickly, I wanted to say that the Chamber is here to support you during this crisis, and we'll be hosting a number of webinars, including 2 next week. We also have a resource page on our website that we're posting up to the minute new information and resources. It's www.centralmarylandchamber.org. You can also sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media for updates. This webinar will be recorded and distributed to attendees following the event. And while you are muted, you're welcome to add questions into the chat box. And if we have time at the end, we will certainly try to get to some of those questions. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, we have Stephen Stern, who is a partner with the law firm of Kagan, Stern, Marinella, and Beard. He's a trusted legal advisor and zealous advocate for businesses and individuals throughout the Mid-Atlantic region and across the country. Stephen devotes a significant portion of his practice to representing businesses in employment-related matters, both as an advisor and litigator, as well as representing companies in complex business disputes in federal and state courts and in arbitration. He regularly works with businesses on implementing trade secret protection programs, including the strategic use of non-compete, non-solicitation, non-disclosure, and other agreements, and he litigates these unfair competition matters as well. For more information about Stephen and his firm, you can visit the website at www.kaganstern.com. Next, we have Brian Dykstra, who's the CEO of Atlantic Data Forensics, Inc., an internationally recognized company handling hundreds of forensic investigations and data breaches each year for clients in the US, Asia, and the Middle East. Mr. Dykstra has over 25 years experience in investigations, computer forensics, incident response, and secure network architecture, and regularly testifies as a computer forensics expert in US federal and state court cases. He is a regular speaker at dozens of cybersecurity conferences each year. For 6 years, Brian was a contract computer crime investigations instructor teaching at the FBI Academy, the FBI Regional Computer Forensics Lab, and many FBI field offices. Mr. Dykstra is a weekly computer forensics and incident response instructor for the cybersecurity training site Cybrary and regular contributor to several related podcasts. Thanks for being with us, Brian. And lastly, we have Chris Rees-Mandel, who is the founder and owner of Epic Inc., a managed IT service provider company, as well as managed security service provider. In Epic's 23 years of creating IT business solutions for their clients, they've maintained a customer-focused solution approach. Epic's services range from help desk to custom business applications, including cloud services, cybersecurity, and business continuity. Epic's clients range from law firms, manufacturers, government contractors, distribution companies, home builders, and commercial appraisers. Epic provides CIO advisory services to business owners regularly, focusing on how businesses are being affected by technology and how technology is affecting their businesses. Thanks for being here, Chris. So now I will kick it off with the first question, which is, what is a trade secret?
All right, thanks, Christy. Let's start with the definition of trade secret and understand the distinction between a trade secret and confidential business information. A trade secret is a subset of confidential business information. So thinking back to those days in high school when you learned those Venn diagrams, not all confidential business information is a trade secret, but trade secrets should be confidential business information. There's actually a legal definition for it. It's generally driven by different state statutes, but under the Uniform Trade Secrets Act, there's a definition that says a trade secret is any information, including a formula, pattern, compilation, program, device, method, technique, or process that, and here's the key, derives independent economic value, actual or potential, from not generally being known to or not being readily ascertainable by proper means by other persons who can obtain economic value from its disclosure or disclosed use. And it also requires that the trade secret be subject to efforts that are reasonable under the circumstances to maintain its secrecy. So why is that important for businesses? I can't tell you the number of times I talk to clients and they say, oh, this is confidential. They slap the confidentiality label on it. but you have to look at what effort went into determining whether or not it's confidential and what efforts the company undertakes to protect the confidentiality. For example, if everyone in the company has access to it, that's generally going to work against the company in protecting this information as a trade secret. So there are many factors that go into determining what a trade secret is, and the 6 general factors that, but these are not exclusive, that companies should consider is the extent to which the information is known outside the company's business. So how easy is it for a competitor, for example, to ascertain the information or compile it? The extent to which the information is known to employees or others involved in the business. I had one case once where literally every employee, it was a small business, but every employee in the company had access to the information, which works substantially against the company in trying to protect it as a trade secret. The extent to which measures are taken by the employer to guard the secrecy of the information. We're going to be talking a little bit about that today. Other factors are the value of the information to the employer and its competitors. The value of a trade secret ranges from hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars. 2 of the most valuable trade secrets in the world are worth billions of dollars. For a long time, the most valuable trade secret in the world was known as the Coke formula. And that may still be the case today. Many people now believe the Google algorithms are now perhaps the most valuable trade secret in the world. So it really has a wide range in value and something that companies really need to invest time, effort, and resources in protecting. Another factor is the amount of effort or money expended by the employer in developing the information. And lastly, the ease or difficulty with which the information may be properly acquired. So that's what is involved in establishing a trade secret. But understanding here, as we're talking about protecting our information networks and servers, there's other information with hacks going on, which we're going to be talking about today. You want to be protecting employee bank account information if there's direct deposits, social security numbers, health information. There could be information that's shared with a business partner that's contractually obligated to be kept confidential. There's lots of different ways of confidential information to be exchanged or exposed. It's important that companies understand how to protect that information. So that is it with respect to trade secrets.
Great, thanks so much. The next question we have is, what risks are there with protecting confidential business information during the pandemic?
Sure. Well, there's a legal side to it, and then there's the tech side. Now, I guess I'll handle the legal component first. Now, with during regular times, there's misappropriations with trade secrets and other confidential information going on all the time. These are cases I regularly handle. But now, when sadly people are in desperate situations, you're going to see more bad conduct potentially from employees. I think, Brian, when we were talking about preparing for this, I don't want to misquote you, but I think you said that bad employees become worse employees or something to that effect. And I think we see that unfortunately happening at a time like this, where people are anxious about their jobs. And also there's more opportunity for employees to engage in misconduct for those that are working remotely. By nature of the fact that employees are working more remotely, unless if the employer really clamps down on monitoring how employees are accessing this confidential information and trade secrets, there's more risk for employees to be misappropriating it. Whether employees email it to themselves and to work on a document that's confidential on their home computer or on their desktop, or the fact that's also on their personal email account, or employees could be taking information offline and not on the company's network, that increases the risk to companies substantially, because once the information is off the company's network, the company loses the ability, in most instances, to track that information. So you have that going on. In addition, with employees now, sadly, there's lots of people that are losing their jobs. The numbers keep coming out where more and more people are being terminated or furloughed. What is the company doing, particularly in a remote environment, to recapturing that information, making sure employees return it and are maintaining copies of it? So this really comes down to employers implementing appropriate policies, procedures, and practices to secure the information, make sure employees comply with those policies, sign off on the proper certifications, and companies do the appropriate steps at the beginning of the relationship, during the relationship, and at the conclusion of the relationship, which includes training employees on the policies and procedures, making sure they sign the agreements, reminding them of their obligations when the relationship ends, whether it be temporarily through a furlough or permanently with a layoff. So, and we could go into some of those policies and procedures in a little bit more detail, but broadly speaking, think about ways where you as a company want to make sure that you are monitoring or maintaining control over the information. And if an employee has access to it, the employee is returning it, deleting it. And remember that deleting it in electronic form doesn't always mean it's deleted. I'll leave that to our tech experts to talk about. And that transitions into their technological components on how companies can protect this information. And that's where Chris and Brian come in to talk about that.
Chris, your mic.
I think that goes right into the next question in terms of what role does technology play in helping limit the risk of employees stealing confidential business information. And what we've seen is that, you have the threats from employees, and then obviously you have hackers or some other type of person trying to get your data. And we look at it two different ways when you have the employees. You can have either human error, because good people do make mistakes, and that's the one thing we usually see, and we like to err on that side of the judgment. Or you have a malicious employee, which is more the situation that Stephen's talking about. Is okay, now they've actually gone ahead and they've exfiltrated some data or done something with the data that they shouldn't be. So when we look at from a hacker's perspective, they're looking for a couple different things. They're looking for A, either to get insurance money out of your organization, or B, they're trying to get exfiltration of data or those trade secrets. And sometimes they're doing both as well too. So, but ultimately, I think it goes back to what's most important. And it depends on what your policies state. And I think that's kind of where, from a technology perspective, we're trying to figure out what makes the most amount of sense for each organization. So a great example is right now, some people, Stephen, you alluded to that people are working from home now. They're using their personal devices because they had no choice. Okay. So what is your policy now from your organization? Are you allowing people to email, files from their office location and sending them to their personal devices? What is that policy? But then there's other types of controls you can put into the system, right? Do you allow, are you logging access to the system? Who's coming in, when, and where? That's always a key thing that I know Brian always is looking for. What happened? And having those things into place is important. The other thing is, are you limiting the access? And I love the fact that Stephen brought that up as well too, is that, do you have basic security rights on the files in your organization? Are they in the cloud? Are they on servers? Who has access to them? Does everyone have access to them, or only the people that are appropriate? I mean, for instance, does a secretary have access to the trade secrets, or is it just the people that are developing those trade secrets that have access to that? And those are all very important things to consider. Also, too, typically even owners of businesses have access to everything as well too. So they have access to the financials, the systems, et cetera, which makes them more of a target for hackers, as well as if their information is compromised, their credentials, someone else can get the information. So another one is obviously we have this bring your own device policy that a lot of organizations have. So for instance, what are we doing in that regard? Are we preventing emails going to their personal devices? Because if they have email on their personal device, they can forward it to another account right off their personal device. So do you have a mobile device management strategy for dealing with that? Or is it something that it is what it is? And I think these are all things that are important for every organization to consider. Also too is, again, do you want them to have access from their personal devices? Right now, the internet has gone upside down. And what I mean by that is we used to be all working in our offices behind our corporate firewalls, and we had protection of all those corporate systems. Now everyone's at home, and what we're seeing is a huge shift of the attacks happening to people's home devices, because now they have the ability to hack in from their home device and get back to your corporate resources. Because think about it, you're sitting at home, Stephen's probably sitting right there right now working on his computer. His daughter might be sitting there, doing schoolwork. My daughter might be doing schoolwork, my kids. You have all that happening right now in a home network that's not as secure as your corporate environment. So these are all things to consider when you're looking from that perspective. Also, device storage, like I mentioned about where do you store your media? I think that's really important, because do you allow people to use USB devices? Okay, that's issue. Is everything in cloud storage? Are they storing it up in Google Drive because it's easy? These are all things that you have to consider. And Stephen can tell you about all the policies and all the disclaimers that Google has in terms of who owns all the data in Google, right? So those are all things to kind of consider as well too. The next thing is, depending on how valuable you perceive your data, you may want to consider doing something like a data loss prevention. And we do that for a lot of organizations in regards to PCI compliance, which is like storing credit card information, emailing credit card information, PII, personal identifiable information. We block with a data loss prevention the ability to email people's credit card numbers, their social security numbers, et cetera, in the emails as well as the documents they send. So these are little things that you can do to help protect your data in your organization. The other thing that we see as well as too is data encryption. So when we talk about data encryption, we talk about it in two different ways, which is one is specifically, is the data encrypted at rest? And what that means is that A, is it secure on your laptop? So if someone steals your laptop, A, can they easily open up the laptop, pull out the hard drive and get all the data off the system? If it's encrypted, it's a large barrier of entry for them. And we've heard stories of, so-and-so walking around with their corporate logo on their bag and is sitting in a car. And now if someone wants to steal that corporate data, they know exactly what the location is or what company it's related to. Okay, so that's another clue for a theft or for a thief. The other one is having data encrypted in transport. And what that means is that anytime you're communicating or sending data, it wants to be encrypted. So if you're working from home, you should be using VPN access at a minimum to get to your corporate resources and being access data. Therefore, your data is encrypted as it's going between your laptop and back to the office location. So that's one that we recommend, that as well as having multi-factor. And we believe we should multi-factor everything that's out there possible, and not just via an email or a text. We recommend using a one-time password application like the Google Authenticator or as well as the Microsoft Authenticator. And ultimately, user awareness training, I think, is probably the highest level that we're seeing as well too. And teaching your clients and your employees, to make smart decisions. Don't click on links because, even if your data gets sent off or uploaded, et cetera, if you're clicking on a link, it's inviting those hackers or that malicious software to get on the machine. And that may be from a rogue employee that's trying to get something on your machine, or as well as a external hacker. So don't click on links if you don't have to. And if you have something that's a link, like for instance, a Zoom meeting, go to zoom.us, type in the meeting number and join that way. Same thing with LinkedIn. Don't just accept a LinkedIn invite. Go log into your LinkedIn, make sure it's somewhere valid, and accept it through the website itself. So, and then the last thing we're doing as well too is we're setting up managed detection and response on our client networks. And what that is it's an application that runs on a network. So if we see a computer starting to upload a lot of data or transferring data outside your network, we're able to lock that down pretty quickly and stop that action 24/7. So those are all just some big things that we've seen that have made a big difference in terms of protecting your data from not only internal threats, but external threats as well too. And I think just ultimately the threats are the same. Ultimately, you don't want your data to leave your network, and you want to maintain control of your data and your trade secrets. So using some technology controls can definitely minimize that risk, and also logging that information allows you to identify what happened, which gives you a better case if you ever have to defend it, unfortunately, if you do get in that situation. So, Christy, I think we have the next question here.
So we've seen reports that cyber attacks have been occurring more frequently. Is this true? And if so, to what extent are you seeing attacks on networks?
Sure. So, what we've seen is a huge uptick in attacks. We've seen about an 800% increase on financial institutions as well as just general networks. But what's interesting, what we've seen is the types of attacks are been zero-day attacks. What zero-day attacks tend to be, what that means is a zero-day attack is something that happens. It's a type of virus that hasn't really been named or identified yet. So it may follow a specific structure or type, but it's something that hasn't been clearly identified on what its objective is. And also, we've seen that just historically, 91% of all attacks start with an email. So it may be even an employee sending you a a link to allow them to get into your system remotely. It may be a hacker doing the same type of thing. So being very cautious on email is important. And obviously that goes down to the user awareness training. But also, I think ultimately the attacks have changed quite a bit. Brian, I think you'll see this as well too, and probably elaborate. But what we've seen is that it's not your rich Nigerian uncle anymore asking for money, right? It has gotten to a point where they're a lot more sophisticated. We're seeing where people will email in one way and then follow up with a text another way. So they're very targeted. So I think that's kind of one of the things that's scary in our eyes, is that it's not that they're not just spray and pray, is what we like to say. They're not just going ahead and sending out emails to 10,000 people and hoping that one or two bite. They're actually going, okay, let me identify a target that I'm interested in, and let me try to exfiltrate that data from that target's location. So, and we've seen that shift from, it used to be the large banks and everything else, but now we've seen that shift definitely going more into the small to mid market, just because of they don't tend to be as hardened in security as the larger organizations. So our philosophy has been that you need to do your due diligence. You don't want to be the weakest sheep in the herd, but you don't necessarily have to spend billions of dollars to protect your data. But obviously there's a balance, and understanding that balance of cost versus reward is really key for the risk mitigation perspective that we take when we're looking at networks and saying, okay, what are the risks? How much do we have to protect the data, and what's reasonable? So those are the kind of things that we're seeing from our end. I don't know, Brian, have you seen anything you want to add on that one?
Yeah, so I only hand people's bad day situations. So, to Stephen's policies and procedures, some folks have them, most people don't. And to Chris's controls, companies don't have them. I mean, the data is not encrypted, it's not backed up, it's not logged. They don't know where their data's at. They don't know where their data's going, and they don't have any visibility over it, which is great for my business. I don't change any of that. It hasn't changed in 25 years. I don't expect to change anytime soon. Well, we've seen a huge uptick in the cases that we're bringing in now. So we're doing 2 to 3 times as much business right now, COVID-19, as we were before, which is we're having a hard time keeping up, actually. But it's primarily phishing. There's just a variety of phishes, and a lot of it's directed at people's fear. So it's a WHO or a NIH or a CDC email that says, hey, here's an update on the latest outbreak information in your area. Here's some brand new information on vaccines, trials, stuff like this. And people are legitimately afraid out there, so they're clicking on these. Unfortunately, they're clicking on these, as Chris alluded to, on systems that aren't normally protected by their company to whatever level that is. So a lot of people went home with laptops, and in some cases even people boxed up desktops and took them home from their company. In other cases, the companies just didn't have resources for that, and so they're using home computers and stuff like this, which brings up a whole different issue. And Stephen addressed that really well with the your data on their computers. That data is not coming back. I wish it was, but it's gone. So there's a lot of that activity going on. There's a tremendous amount of fraud right now. So there's a lot of phishing directed at HR and finance departments as they're laying off. I mean, I saw Macy's laid off 125,000 people. All right, that's a huge number of people's unemployment claims, and then all these other last checks and things like that process for that company. And and it's many times larger than a lot of other companies. So it's easy to slide some phishing or some bank change information in there, as well as there's been a real uptick in just internal fraud type stuff. Now, on the other hand, I think some of that's like because of the current situation, fraudsters never have a way out. So in this weird situation, we're actually finding and uncovering fraud that's been going on for years with inside of companies too, that just hadn't been detected before because it was business as usual. And then lastly, ransomware. Just a tremendous amount of ransomware out there right now. And people have this mistaken idea that ransomware happens because some user, some employee of yours clicks on a link and then all of a sudden ransomware is everything. That is a myth. That is not how ransomware happens within your companies. And in fact, to be perfectly honest with this, Chris, I don't believe in end user training. Security training for everybody, it's a nice thing. It's helpful and all that. It's not the solution to the problem. The solution is getting your security controls in place, in your email kill chain, in your web filtering, your content, things like that. There's, a bunch of things as technologists and security professionals we should be doing to protect the end users. That being said, oftentimes the end user is the first indication that we have that something's going wrong. They come in and report, this weird thing's happening, or they call their help desk or things like that. But going back to ransomware right now, ransomware currently is simply a symptom of larger bad security practices at companies. So most ransomware right now is actually an after effect of an actual intrusion on your network. So the hacker's gotten into your network, they have valid credentials, that means they're using real user IDs and passwords on your network. They're getting administrator control on your network after they've been in there for some time. They're stealing confidential information, client records, employee data, financial data, things like this, moving that off your network. And then as a final way to monetize their intrusion, they're physically launching ransomware onto your network. A lot of the ransomware that we're seeing right now, the Maze ransomware, Ryuk, Soba, whatever, I can't ever get the name right on that one, and a couple of these others, they don't even have an automatic spread capability. They're literally being spread by the hacker inside the network. So it's really just a symptom of overall larger problem within these companies. And that's true of some of the biggest ones you're seeing in the news right now, Cognizant and some of these other ones that are all over the news. Those are just, the ransomware there is a symptom of a larger problem.
All right, if I could just sort of circle back on some of that. I'm sorry, did you have more to say?
I was just gonna.
I just wanted to throw that gas out there on all of that, and then
Stephen, I was going to add one point. One thing we saw in the last, probably about the last 70 days or so, 80 days, there's been over 2,000 websites set up with the word Corona with a K or COVID in it. And so over 2,000, and they were all malicious email, spam attacks, et cetera. And that's one of the things we did with our client base is we did something called border nuking, which is when any email coming in from any sites that were created within the last 60 days following that criteria, we don't even let it get to the client's email boxes. And you're right, the user awareness training is kind of the last ditch effort on that regard. If you have good controls or you can protect 90% of solve the problems most of the time, that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't do user training. I mean, I think it's a good thing. I just don't think that should be our go-to. And the reason that is the go-to for a lot of companies, and they like to fish their own people and stuff like that, is because it makes what we call management porn. It makes nice charts and graphs that are easily measurable, and you can say this many people clicked on it this time, this many didn't last time, and all that. It does in no way prevent new phishing attacks from getting into your network. That's why it's not an effective security control.
Yeah, that's where I was going to say that. Well, I understand from a technology and all the hackers coming in, the training only goes so far, but from the legal perspective about trying to protect those trade secrets, trying to protect that confidential information, part of what's going to be analyzed if you find yourself in court down the road is what reasonable measures have you taken. And if I'm trying to defend the company against allegations of misappropriation, you find out the company didn't do any training, didn't have its employees do password protection, or you didn't implement password protection and remind employees to enter the password for certain pieces of information, or you didn't take reasonable measures to regain access at the end of an employment relationship. One of the things I wanted to turn back to Brian, you and Chris, because I know I've had clients doing this for a long time. I'm starting to see more do it, but I'm still surprised how few are aware of ways to recapture information on personal devices. Because one of the things that comes up is when some companies will have employees use their personal devices to access the company emails and network and stuff. So at the end of the employment relationship, the employee says, "Hey, this is my phone, my mobile device. You can't take it from me." But that there's company information on there, and there are ways, and I know there's technological ways that the company can recapture that if the employee doesn't bring the phone in. I don't want to bastardize how we explain that technological component, so I want to turn that back over to you. But I think this is a really important tool beyond the training component of making sure that companies secure information. If it's not a company device, that's not coming back. Obviously, if it's a company device, company has to make sure it comes back, whether it be a laptop or be a phone. But if it's a personal device of the employees, what do you guys recommend in that regard in terms of some software that I know exists? But you guys are the tech experts. I'll let you talk about that.
So Chris, I'm gonna let you go first, and then I'm just gonna bomb it again. So go ahead.
Chris, you're like.
I think if the tech guy can't work his mic, right? It's so one of the things is, I think, is the mobile device management, but it ultimately starts with your policy. Because if you have a good policy to stand on, I think that's what's going to help you deal with any legal issues that need to be done. Because we have some organizations that we know that have an agreement with their employees that if they need to take their phone because they're terminating, et cetera, they'll buy them a new phone, but they get their complete new phone. Okay. Some have the ability that with mobile device management, and that we notify them if they install the email on their phone, we have the ability to wipe their phone, and it's that will be that they're just to make them aware of that that they may lose their personal photos, things like that, if they're using a personal device, if they're not using the recommended connection methods, i.e. an app on the phone to connect to the corporate email. So those are the kind of things that we talk about, but it all starts really with the policy, because I think setting that groundwork up front makes it a lot easier versus all of a sudden Brian's going to come in here and probably tell you we got to do something like injunction, grab the phone, seize it, do a forensic copy, something along those lines. Nope, he's going to go a different way. Let's see which way he goes.
All right, so here we go. One, don't get all wrapped up in the phone. There's not that much data on the phone. Nobody's looking at spreadsheets on their phone. Nobody's reading 30-page contract documents on their phone. I'm not saying there won't occasionally be one. I'm just saying in the thousands of phones we forensically examine for companies in cases, there's usually very little real corporate data on the phones. There's a little bit of email. It's mostly protected on your iPhone and Android phones, things like this. If you have an MDM solution like Chris was talking about, that'll easily get wiped off the phone. So that's not so much of an issue. And there very seldom are there any real corporate documents or things like this on the phone. The other end of that is the use of webmail accounts at the office, things like this. There's a lot of, unfortunately, use of personal email accounts for business information, things like this. There was a situation, and it's ongoing right now. We've had clients just recently, and since COVID, they didn't have a good way to share documents outside the network, so they started doing things like dumping all the corporate documents out onto Dropbox so that everybody could easily get to them and things like this. These are going to be our bigger problems. Employees that get commingled data on their laptops, which is a very common situation, right? I give an employee a laptop, they've been an employee for years. Yeah, they're going to have personal data on there. They're going to have the company data on there and things like that. If you terminate them and don't plan for that, and don't have some sort of plan for how you're going to get that data back, yeah, it's going to be out there, because no matter how good a person you are right now, if Steven shows up and lets you know that you're being terminated today, about 70% of us take data, and you think you won't. You think you won't until that time comes, and then you're like, well, I'm just going to grab my contacts, and I'm just going to grab a few of these emails that I had here, and I've been working on this project. It's really important to me, and I'm going to just take a copy of, and let me just get that PowerPoint slide set that I did that was really, that's all company data, and we sort of justify that when things happen. But that is the sort of things that people send to email to themselves, or they make copies of off their computers and things like this. And the reality is, once it leaves, it's not likely you're getting it back. There's legal machinations for doing all that.
Yeah, I mean, you got to go to court and get that injunction, which there's
right. You got to get TROs, all this kind of stuff, and in the meantime, that data's out there, and there's how many copies of it. I mean, I'm never, and we do some extreme measures, for companies to try and ensure their data is protected after these situations. But you can never be 100% sure that there's not another copy somewhere and things like this. So going back to what Chris said, good policies, and Stephen talked this off the lead, good policies around handling that, but then get some technology in place within your organization. I mean, it is within the capability of most of our file servers and file storage solutions to actually track who accessed what document when. We almost never do that. Companies just don't do that. We don't get serious about it until after we've had a major problem. And then, C-level employees start going, well, I thought we encrypted everything and I thought we tracked everything. And that's almost never the situation. And it's usually come up, but it's a management failure. Management failed to pay for the solution. Management failed to direct that, solutions like that actually be put in place and to follow up and make sure that they actually happen. They oftentimes view it as an IT problem. It very seldom is an IT problem. You can do almost anything in IT you want as long as you have a budget of people to make it happen.
But that goes back to, I'm glad you raised those things. One of the themes here, I hope the audience is taking away, is making sure that companies do everything they can to maintain control over that information through its networks, its servers, or on its database, whatever, rather than letting it offline. You mentioned Dropbox, for example. And then the other thing is a combination of the policies with the technology, using that to, for example, password protect or trace when the information is taken offline and put back in. Granted, you want to have certain certifications if employees are going to be taking information offline. You want to try to prevent against that as much as possible. I realize people in COVID-19 are trying to adapt as quickly as possible to allow people to work from home, but at that point is where careless mistakes are made, and now you're trying to play catch up. So the point that Chris and Brian were alluding to is, now how do we try to get control over that and try to think more methodically about these things again, people are already working remotely, but trying to get out front before too much time passes and trying to maintain control over that information.
Yeah, I have a good example right now. So we're dealing with a fraud case right now where a bunch of financial data, employee financial data, so their bank account information, things like this was taken, and it's being misused by a fraud ring. And when we talk to management at the company, general counsel and chief financial officer and CEO, things like this, about, well, how would this data have gotten out? Who has access to it? How many people are in your, payroll department, things like this, that would have access to your payroll company? I'm looking, expecting a small number. It's a good sized company, but, 10 or less sort of people would probably have access to all that sort of payroll data. We discovered that it was, somewhere north of 50 people had access to it, and because of all the copies that had been made and the various places that had been placed around, it became out that maybe it's closer to 300-400 people could have accessed this data in one of these many places that it got left, lying around over a period of time. Who did it now? I have no idea. We're never going to find it, by following documents that way. And they don't have any ability to follow those documents. So, getting those controls in place ahead of time and going, this is important data and only these people need to access it ever. And if there's an exception made, we know about it.
I think, Brian, what about in regards to, we're talking about the mobile devices as well too, and the data, but I think some of the things that we've seen with court cases that you and I have talked about and worked on is, what about text messages and getting items like that versus, that show intent, as well as that in, going into maybe their personal iCloud account or doing those types of things. What are you seeing in that environment?
Yeah, so text messages are the one thing that I would legitimately say, the phone has that can contain quite a bit of information on, right? And when I say text messages, I mean every kind of texting sort of app you're using, WhatsApp or Instagram, whatever your texty thing of choice. I've actually seen Venmo used as a text app. Sending 1 cent payments so they could talk back and forth and send data. It is crazy. But yeah, so it doesn't matter what your text app is. Yeah, there's there's little to no controls out there for all of those different things. And short of having a mobile device management software for your company where you actually lock down and restrict the apps you can have on your phone, which good luck trying to get everybody to agree to put that on their phone. You know, there's not a lot of great ways to do that. And some folks are really prolific texters or WhatsApp users or things like this. You know, in some industries, we've found, you know, north of 400,000 and 500,000 text messages and things like this on a given mobile device. So there can be a significant amount of company data, and a lot of times it's because in that industry, that's just the way the business gets done, right? You know, one of the good examples is almost all your construction site work and things like this is done off tablets and mobile phones, and all the interactions between vendors and timing and pricing and updates and you name it is all done through texting apps back and forth. So if you have some kind of dispute later on about, you know, construction of a building or whatever it might be, you have to go through dozens, sometimes even, you know, hundreds of people's phones and tablets and things like this, trying to piece back together these huge strings of who approved what, when, for what project, and so on.
One other thing about the mobile devices, you're talking about the information that's on there. One thing that I find where clients are often in a fight with former employees is customer or client information that may be on emails. And that comes up a good amount, and it's a whole other discussion that would take us an entire other session to talk about whether customers constitute, or customer information constitutes a trade secret. There's case law back and forth on that. Certainly the law recognizes it could be, but there's a lot of factors that go into it. And that's one thing that I've found frequently where, to your point, Brian, there isn't usually a lot of other corporate documents on there, but if they're attached to emails about specific customer information, that's where I find many fights and disputes coming up. And then to your point, especially now with in the younger generation, but even older folks as well, are texting a lot of information back and forth where there could be key information on there as well. And again, recapturing that, because that's certainly not going to be on any device that network that the company is controlling.
Right. I mean, if you have a salesperson that just quit off your sales team, I guarantee you they took a copy of all your Salesforce contact data. It's just the nature of things. I mean, you can say I'm wrong, but you know, it's just the nature of what people do.
Okay. What should a company do if they experience a hack?
Well, that's there's a legal and technical component to that, a technological component to that as well. If you experience a hack, there may be notification and disclosure obligations on the company. And that's an interplay between federal and state law, mostly state. Each state has its own notification requirements. And this just came up not that long ago for a client where we had to examine the laws of all 50 states which is where they operated. And that's largely driven by the notification requirements, are going to be largely driven by whether or not the hacker has access to the information, or is it something where, you know, Brian alluded to ransomware before. Is it ransomware where they're just locking down your information? Even then, that may not be the answer. There could also be if it's ransomware, but they also have, the hacker has access to the key to unlock it. That could trigger your notification obligations. A notice would go to those affected. There could be some notifications that go to the government as well. So you really have to dig in technologically. I'll turn this back over to Chris and Brian as to what they do to figure out, you know, what happened factually, so that when it comes to the work that I do about notification and making that analysis. But there's also, you have to be mindful, is there an interaction with HIPAA at the federal level as to what notification obligations are. So you could have to notify regulators, you may have to notify individuals. And also, by the way, there are timing requirements within all this. So in the event of a breach, a hack, you've got to get in touch with your tech team, folks like Brian and Chris, to do an investigation and figure out, if they can, trace the information as to where it went and and who has access to what. And at that point, let me turn it back over to Chris and Brian to say, what do you guys do from a tech standpoint to actually figure out what happened to give someone like me guidance on what advice should be given about disclosure obligations?
So I think that's a great question. Normally when we have we have an incident, someone thinks they have something going, we'll investigate and look at our tools. And depending on what we see, a lot of times it's a false positive that they think something's happening when it really wasn't. But if it does, that's where, we work with our law. We have a lot of law clients that we work with that we will refer them to Brian and say, hey, they have a court case that is that's right up Brian's alley. So let me, I'll say once we kind of do the handoff, Brian takes it from there.
Right. So there's no absolute pat answer for what you should do. But the first thing you should do is not panic, right? You can get help. It may be the worst day you've experienced in your company. For me, it's just Thursday, right? We do this every day over and over and over again. So you get professional help to come in, qualified people to help you work your way through it. If you contacted counsel ahead of time, which I always recommend now, you should not be handling a data breach or an insider situation or a ransomware even without the benefit of counsel. I won't work on it for you without the benefit of counsel because I'm trying to protect, the company in the situation. And the reason we do that is we want to do the contracting and everything else through the legal counsel so that we can then claim attorney-client privilege over the investigation data and the work product that I'm working on as we're investigating. So what I know on day 2 or 3 of an incident response to a computer hack may not be accurate. It may be completely inaccurate, as a matter of fact. And what I find out 2 months down the road or 6 weeks from now or whatever, when we finally got it all sorted out, could be completely different information. So we want to prevent, erroneous information from getting out. We also want to, as Stephen said, be cognizant of any of those timelines if there's a data loss situation. Remember, like I said before, ransomware nowadays is not really just somebody clicked on it and you got ransomware. It's more likely you've had an intrusion. The hackers had an opportunity to peruse through your network, take data that they wanted, and things like this. And so while the ransomware itself's not that big of an issue, it's an issue from your ability to do business. Your larger issue could be that a bunch of data has escaped your network and things like this. There's also a lot more extortion going on around that right now. So there's a group that uses malware called ReEvil and also the Maze malware groups. They specifically do encryption of your data to disrupt your business, but they also steal large chunks of data and then will extort you for more money to return that data. Otherwise, they actually publish all that data online. And they publish it worldwide, so there's no opportunity to do a quick takedown before everybody and their brothers had an opportunity to look at it. The news media's gotten to it and everything else. So it's the new way of extorting more money out of people, and it's very dangerous. So one, make a call to some professionals. Make sure you got an IR team in there, you got legal counsel in there. Things like this, and then we just start making good decisions, working our way through it, trying to contain the problem as quickly as possible, and ideally getting the company back to normal function as quickly as possible. It's contain, eradicate, remediate. So having a plan for that is key, though. Don't panic. Just make the phone calls and get some professionals in to help you.
And I think
among the phone calls, I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I was going to add one thing, Stephen. I'll give you the floor. So that's also too, and this is usually it's happened, and you want to react to whatever happened to get legal counsel. We've also had the situation where you're suspect of someone in your organization doing something they're not supposed to. So at that point in time, letting your IT know and saying, okay, what do we need to do? What types of information can we grab? Get your legal counsel involved, and then maybe you have to build a case to deal with the situation.
I would greatly appreciate it if people would not let their IT departments mess around with it for 3 or 4 weeks before they call me. That makes our job much harder. Your IT folks, I'm sure they're good at keeping the email running and keeping everybody's desktops going and stuff like that. They're in no way prepared for what needs to be done in an incident response situation. And I'm going to use them, while we're doing the incident response. They're going to help me. They're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. But trying to come up with some do-it-your-home brew situation in an incident is not the way to go.
And I agree with you, Brian. But I guess what I was going to say is, my point I'm trying to make is it's not usually it's happened and now I got to respond to it like a ransomware situation. You may have something that has triggered your alert that you need to deal with now, and you can have your IT people deal with that, but get you involved right away so that you're handling the chain of custody properly throughout the process. So that was my point. Stephen, all yours.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that's important from a litigation standpoint as well, to make sure that it's properly, you have the forensic copy of everything that you're looking at to trace it. So there aren't authentication issues if we find ourselves in court down the road. And going to the point about not waiting a few weeks before getting someone like Brian involved, some of these disclosure obligations are 30, 45 days, 60 days. So you have to be moving really quickly because Brian's work doesn't happen overnight. It takes some time to dig in and really figure out what's going on. Other notifications you should be thinking about is also looking at your insurance policies, see if there's cyber coverage of some kind, whether it be protected there. I know from some of the hacking cases where plaintiffs, consumers have been brought class actions against companies that have been hacked, and courts have been mixed in their rulings so far as to whether or not those plaintiffs have standing because they haven't suffered an injury. In fact, lots of times there's a fear or concern that something's going to happen to their personal information or it's going to be misused, but there hasn't been any evidence of actual harm as of this point. So there's a lot of legal machinations as well as technical machinations that have to be addressed in something like this. And also in the event of a breach, I hate to, look, I know with these guys on this webinar, but I've got a case right now where there was a hack, and after the fact investigation showed that this technology service provider just was woefully below the standards of care, and therefore this company is taking action against that company. So there's lots of things to be looking at in the event of a potentially bad event like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of very, very bad managed IT out there. Outsourced IT providers, managed service providers, and even managed security service providers out there that are just woefully unqualified for what they're doing. And unfortunately, they have a lot of people's data entrusted to them. That's why I recommend people like Chris, because I know his procedures are not like that. But yeah, I deal with those on a daily basis. I have large MSP breach right now that the breach at their end, because their IT security is not good, allowed all their clients to be breached and so on. And we're dealing with the ramifications of that. I have another call this afternoon for a very similar sort of situation. I mean, and part of the truth in that outsourcing of your IT or working with a managed service provider is you get what you pay for. If you're getting a really good deal on that, you're probably not getting a great product, right? If you're buying, if you're shopping that strictly on dollar, it's definitely going to come back and cost you a lot of money. You should be paying a reasonable amount of money for a good, high quality service if you care about protecting your company and your data.
Okay, well, we have one more question prepared, and then we have some great questions coming through the chat line here. But what should you do if there's a misappropriation of a trade secret or other confidential business information?
All right, in light of the timing, I'll try to go really quickly on this. Usually in the event, in this instance, I'm going to assume that the company knows that it's a former employee or some other third party where it's identifiable. And in that case, you want to promptly get out a cease and desist letter advising the employee and his or her new employer about the actions, because if the former employee took it, odds are that he or she is using it in connection with their new employment. But it's not limited to employees. It could be independent contractors. You should also be asking yourself, why do independent contractors have access to my trade secrets in the first place? Sometimes it's appropriate from a business standpoint, sometimes maybe not. And that goes into the whole definition of whether you're taking appropriate measures to protect it. Nevertheless, whoever the identifiable people or entities are that you believe have access to it, you should immediately put them on notice, cease and desist, and to take appropriate measures to put an end to it. Sometimes that works, where the company, particularly a new employer, says, wait, we don't want any part of this. And they're going to get in touch with you and try to work with you collaboratively to get it resolved and make sure it doesn't escalate to litigation. In instances where that doesn't happen, which happens plenty of the time, you have to be considering moving forward with litigation. And the question that a company has to ask, a couple of questions companies have to ask is, do you want to move forward expeditiously with seeking a TRO, temporary restraining order? You want to move quickly in those instances, because if it is that harmful that this information is out there in the universe outside of your company and your control, you want to try to capture that and put an end to that as quickly as possible. The longer you wait in the face of a knowing violation, not if you don't know, but if you know about a violation that's out there, or know about a misappropriation, the longer you wait, that does potentially undermine your ability to get the injunctive relief or the temporary restraining order. Maybe not the permanent injunctive relief down the road. So you've got to be weighing how quickly do you want to move. One thing that I always, that's a challenge for companies when some of that confidential information or trade secret is out there and they think this is not an instance where we're likely to suffer a lot of harm. And so then from a cost benefit analysis, the company might be thinking like, look, we don't really see a big downside here. Why should we spend more than we think we're exposed in this case? And that happens sometimes. Sometimes, as we know, the values of the information out there could be substantial, the millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. But for those that are in smaller potential economic harm, company has to think about, well, if I pass up on this opportunity, it's not this case that's necessarily hurting you. Maybe the next case where there's a bigger dollar value at stake because the harm may be potentially greater. And then by not taking action now, when perhaps the potential damages don't seem all that great, it could undermine you later when the damages are substantially more. So you really have to be thinking about not just the case in front of you, but the future case that you don't know about yet and how you calculate taking action. What about on the technological side to Chris and Brian about how do you respond once this occurs?
Yeah, so we jump on those activities really fast because the need to get a TRO in front of the court is really important, and that doesn't require complete forensic analysis of every computer. So it's about collecting just enough information up to provide to counsel so that they can go to the court and make a good argument that yeah, the company's being damaged by this. There's losses, things like that around that. And we have absolutely seen companies driven out of business by the loss of that information, or just take millions of dollars worth of business losses because of that stolen information. So it's not that hard nor that expensive to go out there and take those measures to try and recover that data, and the potential payoff is just huge.
And I should clarify, it's not only injunctive relief, you also have the opportunity to recover monetary damages as well. So, but yeah, it depends on the other side, whether they've got the resources to do it. And I should be mindful, it's an important reminder that these instances occur not only when it's a bad breakup. My very first client that I got when I was a newbie lawyer that I brought in on my own, I remember a week after signing the engagement letter, I get a call from the entire executive management team. I'm thinking, what could have possibly gone wrong so quickly? And one of the founders of the company had left a couple of weeks ago, and they found that their source code was out there on the internet that he was posting far and wide. It was all hugs and kisses when he was leaving. So, you never know where these sources of misconduct may be coming from. It could still be in a very friendly situation and not realizing it. So you really have to take appropriate measures when someone leaves to lock down information, cut off access, make sure you're getting proper certifications from people. Now we're coming to the end of our time, and I know Christy said there were some questions possibly coming in.
Yeah, we'll try to get through a few real quick. Dropbox is not a safe tool, so what else is suggested? This attendee said, we're required to send secure emails often. We also have to coach the receiver of the emails on how to open the secure Microsoft emails. Since there's no unified program, do you have any suggestions?
All right, one, I want to say, I just picked Dropbox out of a hat. Dropbox can be made to be secure, as can most, Box.com or, Google Drive or OneDrive or any of these other things. The way most companies handle it is an insecure manner. And then Chris, I'll let you as the MSP go ahead and make suggestions.
Well, yeah, so like that's the kind of stuff that we've seen as well too, and I think it's a matter of setting it up properly, Brian. Like we've seen where people they'll share their finance directory on Dropbox, and then the people will have it synced to their local machine, at their home network, and then all of a sudden they get a ransomware at home. Next thing you know, it encrypts the data and then syncs up into the network that way as well too. So it really becomes on terms of what do you share, how do you share, and making sure you limit those access controls, and maybe even put some applications like a share file, etc. They can allow you to let that data expire over X period of time. But always know the moment you've shared it out, you've pretty much you've possibly lost control of that data. That's the reality of it. So if they have it, they can access it, they can see it. Maybe they can't download it, but they can screenshot it. They can do a lot of things to the data. So just be prudent on who you share your data with.
Great, thanks guys. The next question is, what industries or companies have set best examples for putting policies and measures in place to protect against these problems?
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm not really sure I know how to answer that. My experience has been company by company and working collaboratively with the management team. It's not just drawing, some boilerplate policies. I always try to tailor them to the company's needs to figure out, because one of the things I like when I talk about trade secrets and confidential information is I've got to get inside the brains of the operation, understand what information is valuable, how is it used by the company, and how are they vulnerable to this information getting out, and how is it exchanged. So we try to figure out ways to tailor the policies and practices to that company's particular needs.
And I think that ties into, I like to deal not necessarily their vertical or type of business, but I think it ties more to the service level maturity of that business, that specific business. How long have they been around? Do they dot their I's and do they cross their T's? Do they have good policies and procedures in place? What level of maturity do they have in their other business functions? And I think that typically denotes like how well they are with their policies and their IT. So that's kind of the perspective we've seen.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I've worked on some breaches at 200,000 employee companies that had less security than some 15-person companies that I've worked at. So I mean, the size of the company, industry, things like that they're not an indicator for how secure they are and things like this. But I guess if you had to model off of somebody, I would say that the financial services, the healthcare, and the energy verticals are probably the most policy cognizant, the most secure, and it's just because they have lots of regulations on them.
Great. Next question. I have all Macs at my office. Do I really have to worry about security?
I didn't hear the question. Can you repeat that?
Oh my God. All right, please, Mac people, listen to me. You got to pay attention for just a second. You are what most new malware is written for, right? So the amount of new malware coming out for Macs greatly outpaces the amount of malware coming out for Windows systems. That's because you have this notion in your head as Mac users that somehow you don't get viruses, and Apple's been happy to go along with you on that train. It is not true. Most of the Mac, malware stuff like that out there is just more subtle. They don't go after ransomware and things like this. They steal your credentials, so they steal your user ID and passwords for all your accounts, your bank accounts, your insurance, your Amazon, your iCloud, all this sort of stuff. So it's all targeted towards a lot of account and data theft stuff that's kind of subtle and in the background and not as obvious as something as ransomware. Every single time we put antivirus software on some Mac situation where they've never had it on there before because we don't get viruses, we always pull up dozens and dozens of pieces of malware off their computers. Please put antivirus software on your Macs.
All right, we'll do one more question real quick. A former employee is sharing data with others, but we can't prove it. What can we do? They have a 3-year non-compete.
Well, I'm going to assume for the moment that the non-compete is enforceable. I mean, those have got to be written very carefully and narrowly tailored to protect the company's interests. But if you're suspecting, if you don't have to have actual proof at this point, it could be actual misappropriation or a threat of misappropriation. And so I would want to know factually what's giving rise to those suspicions. And also, in my experience, it's always interesting how companies find out things that employees or former employees do. There's a way it often circles back. And so I try to press some of those sources or resources to figure out how likely this is really happening. I mean, you don't want to be making a baseless argument, but obviously there's reason why the suspicion exists. I want to know factually more about that. And if it's enough, you don't need actual proof. It's of misappropriation. It's the actual misappropriation or threat of misappropriation is enough to get into court and actually get a TRO. But you have to be able to prove those allegations and why the threat is real. So I need to know more factually to be able to give more detailed guidance on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're tons of insider cases, fraud cases, stuff like that. Go with your gut. Your gut's just your brain putting a bunch of little things together and coming up with some sort of answer. If you're feeling like there's something, it's worth taking a look at and taking some action on.
Great, thanks everyone. And thanks for all the attendees for joining us for today's webinar. Special thanks to Stephen, Chris, and Brian for sharing their expertise with us. I think we could have a whole series of webinars just on this topic because there's so much we could cover. As a reminder, I'll be sending out a recording of today's webinar, hopefully later today or tomorrow. I'm also going to include contact information for our panelists along with their websites. I know Chris mentioned there are tips and suggestions found on their blog. It would be great if you follow our panelists and you can stay up to date on all of the things we discussed today. So when you receive the recording by email, feel free to respond with other topics you'd be interested in hearing from us about. Again, thanks to our panelists and our attendees, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for hosting, Christy.
Thank you.